Let's talk non-physical, non-physical. Let's talk non-physical. Let's talk non-physical. Let us have some spirit talk. Some spirit talk. Let us have some spirit talk.
Let me give you my opinion about what you said about the living in a simulation. In the case of the movie The Matrix, the parent reality was also physical.
Yeah.
But Donald Hoffman doesn't say that the parent reality is physical. He, as far as I know, he doesn't say how it is. The only thing he says is that it's consciousness. So I don't see a problem with that. I agree with this being a simulation. It looks to be like a simulation.
Yeah, sure. I was going to say,
go ahead.
I first heard of Hoffman years ago, and he shared the stage with David Chalmers. David Chalmers actually organized the event. It was like a symposium where they were talking about the hard problem of consciousness, and they were supposed to present, possible solutions to the hard problem. And I remember Daniel Dennett came on and he presented his multiple drafts theory of consciousness, and that somehow consciousness arises and it's not really what it seems. It's an illusion, which I didn't buy. And then Stuart Hameroff, who works with Sir Roger Penrose, said, oh, we disagree with that. We think it arises from quantum mechanics, and they had a disagreement. And then I remember Hoffman coming on. I think he came on last, and he presented something which at the time I thought, wow, that's something that the other two they didn't really address the problem, because even Stuart Hameroff, when he says quantum mechanics produces consciousness, I'm still lost, because I'm still wondering, well, how? That's the question they don't address. And at least Hoffman said, well, it's fundamental like any other force. It's already there. And if you think about it, it's indivisible. It's indestructible. You have to experience it firsthand. You can't hold it. You can't, it's not physical, really, if you think about it. It's really deep. And I just think it just makes me, there's a series of events which really made me think materialism is going nowhere. And basically we've talked about this last year. Hoffman points to the trio of scientists who said that physical, proved that local realism is, their results violated Bell's inequalities. Basically there's a Bell's limit, and when they test for correlation multiple times, if it goes below that limit, then there are hidden variables. But the results actually went over Bell's limit, which means that there are no hidden variables. So reality is really weird.
Right.
And so local realism basically says that objects can only be influenced by other objects nearby, and the interaction or the influence can't exceed the speed of light. And that was proved to be false. So that's one thing that makes Hoffman think, well, there's something there. He's also mentioned the spectral gap problem. So there's the state of zero, and I'm not an expert in this, but he says there's the state of zero, and there's the like the lightest possible state that a particle can be in, and there's a gap between zero and the lightest possible state, and they can't explain why. So again, he reckons that points to the possibility that it's all a simulation.
Yeah.
And then you also get the events regarding consciousness this year. What's his name? David Chalmers won the bet with Christoph Koch, the neurophysiologist, the guy who was testing the neural correlates of. He was testing to know his integrated information theory, and he said 25 years ago, he said to David Chalmers, "We're gonna find all the neural correlates of consciousness. We're going to prove that the theory is correct. In 25 years' time, we will have a physicalist explanation of consciousness. The puzzle will be solved. And David Chalmers said, I bet you won't. And David Chalmers won. Basically, and renowned experts are now saying that the theory fell through. The theory is incorrect. It doesn't prove, it doesn't say anything about consciousness. It's not right. And some of the results that they got weren't what they expected. And then that's another event. And then you get a conference this year held by several experts. And Sean Carroll was there. Donald Hoffman, I think he went as well. Several experts went. Sean Carroll was even asked, you know, what do you think about this after the event? He said, well, I'm at a loss. I can't explain it. I can't explain consciousness. He goes, I feel like I've been part of a TV show I didn't want to take part in. And basically at the conference, everyone disagreed. You got materialists, you got epiphysicalists, you got panpsychists, you got eliminativists. None of them came to a consensus about consciousness. And that just makes me think, it reminds me of something I read in a book by a Tibetan monk years ago. And he used to describe the mind as like the sky, wide open like the sky. And the thoughts that torment you, they're like storms, they're like clouds that come. And sometimes you identify with the storms, you identify with the clouds. But if you meditate, and if you take a step back and you really pay attention, you are not the storms, you are the sky that's wide open, formless. And sometimes it identifies with the forms it adopts, but you are like the sky. And then he said something which stayed with me forever up until today. He said, men will try to understand consciousness. They will rack their brains, they will try everything, and they will fail. They will fail to understand it. And I don't know, I'm beginning to think that he might be right. I think perhaps it's something that you have to, in order to understand it, you have to observe it. You have to observe your own field of awareness, and you have to. This is why I like lucid dreaming as well, because it allows you to explore qualia that perhaps go beyond the default mode, go beyond the qualia that you experience when you are awake and you look at the physical world. Perhaps in lucid dreams, sometimes you see colors that you don't see when you're awake. You know, you don't see those colors in waking life. Sometimes you see forms, you see characters that you sometimes think, I couldn't even possibly imagine that. You know, you don't see how you could. It's almost like it allows you to really explore consciousness and what consciousness can do.
For example, around minute 20 in the video, there is something that Tom says, that it says, and what it says is that the universe, space-time, is an emergent phenomenon from consciousness. The way I see it is, why does it need to be emergent? Because this emergentism is something that materialists had to bring it, because I mean they cannot explain things in another way. I think it shows some influence on the way materialists think.
Well, you're breaking up. The connection is breaking up.
If it's a virtual reality that comes
so you were saying
comes from
information, something that
from consciousness, it doesn't need to emerge from anything. It's just, it can be just code that runs. I mean, would you say that the program emerges from the computer code? I mean, why do you need to use the word emerge? I don't see the need to bring emerge. It's just a quality of consciousness. Is that's what consciousness is able to do. It can generate qualia from information, basically. So you have the information, but you also have qualia related to the information. And then let me keep going. Then see what it says. Well, I talk about the rules about the universe. That is not a problem. Of course, the universe has rules. Those are the rules of nature. I mean, what science studies? Science studies nature. Let me see. Then let's keep going. Let me see what else. Well, they talk about the limitations of biology. And another thing that is brought in the conversation is that they talk about qualia and they relate the qualia with the universe itself. But I mean, from my point of view, qualia is a feature of consciousness, because especially for you and me, we experience qualia when we are lucid dreaming, right, or meditating.
Yeah.
So it's not something exclusively of this reality. It's something for me that is a feature of consciousness. So it's not that the virtual reality. Well, what it does is it forces you a stream of consciousness, a stream of qualia.
Yeah.
Because the stream is consistent, is a regular stream, right? You're watching and everything goes smooth. So it makes the qualia consistent with a regular stream, that sometimes you cannot have the same consistency in a lucid dream, let's say, because it might change more, it might be more dynamic.
I get what you mean. Yeah.
But it's like a different flavor of qualia, but not necessarily caused by the reality itself. That's the way I see it.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Let's see what else.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, another thing that Donald Hoffman says here is that he says that how can a computer explore itself? How is it going to know itself? And he says, well, it's going to have to build a model of itself and write down the model, and then it has to use memory, write memory. And by writing memory, it gets more complicated, he says, and it changes itself. So to understand itself, it changes itself. And well, later on it says something else, but I mean, I'm going to stop it there. But I mean, I disagree a bit with Don Hoffman here, because when you talk about a computer, you can add new memory, you can add new information, but does the computer change? I mean, the computer gets extra information, but that doesn't mean the computer itself is changing. Let's suppose we relate the knowing itself with software that a computer uses to check itself, like software that, for example, it checks the speed of the CPU, the speed of the disk access, the speed of access in memory. I mean, a computer can study itself, but it doesn't change itself to study itself. What it does, it adds software, it does memory, right?
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was thinking that I think he's also maybe he didn't express himself properly, but I think when it comes to computers, if it's a learning program, it can add new things and acquire new knowledge, but the computer itself doesn't change because it's already in its nature to be a learning program. Say in the case of an AI, for example, if the AI is programmed to learn as it goes along, then it's not really changing its nature. It's just acquiring new information. Does that make sense? I mean, that's my
actually AI can process its output and can improve itself. That's something AI also does. Let me read some more pieces of what Donald Hoffman said, because he also talks about. Well, anyway, let me read what he says. Let's see. So, because, for example, if a computer and I want the computer to explore itself, how is it going to know itself? Well, it's going to have to build a model of itself and write down what it says in the very process of building a model of itself and writing into its memory things about itself is becoming more complicated. Well, that's what we were just talking about.
Yeah.
And it says it's changing itself, and we're saying not necessarily changing itself. So now, he says, so now to really understand itself, it's going to have to describe what it just did. And now, so to describe what it just did, it goes into an infinite loop. That's something I also disagree with. Why does it need to go into an infinite loop? I don't know. This is a question I would like to ask Don Hoffman. Why does he assumes this infinite loop? I mean, I don't see the need to get into an infinite loop to try to do a self-understanding.
Is I don't know, I may be mistaken, but is he talking about in the context of the Turing machines? And I know he's touched upon mathematical problems and Gödel's incompleteness theorem. I mean, is it along those lines, like the system can never know itself, or something about the system looping itself and it can never predict when it's going to come to an end, or something like that? I'm completely.
Yeah, he talks also about levels of infinity. Like, for example, you can have a level of infinity if you do increments of 10. For example, you have 0, 10, 20, 30. You can keep going and you have an infinity. But then if you do another infinity that you increment by 5, that infinity grows faster than the infinity that grows by 10. So you have like a different speed of infinities, but they're both infinities, but going at a different rate. So he says those are levels of infinity. But that's another thing I noticed on Donald Hoffman, is that he feels that in order to study consciousness, you need to use mathematical processes. What I agree is that to study a virtual reality is likely that the reality use math to create the reality, use logic and math to create, for example, gravity and all the physical laws. They can be modeled mathematically. But I don't see why that needs to be applied to consciousness itself.
Yeah.
Because consciousness itself might be using a more basic mathematics, and then because it has this feature of awareness, from something basic, it can build something very complex. But it doesn't need to be starting from a very mathematical complexity.
Yeah, I do remember that segment of the conversation, and basically it made me think of a book I've read by Max Tegmark, Our Mathematical Universe. And basically Max Tegmark is a Platonic physicist, right? He thinks that the real basis of reality is mathematics. He is of the opinion, and it does make sense in a way, when he says that mathematics isn't something that humans invented, it's something that's discovered. We may have invented
I agree with that.
We may have invented the language of mathematics, but there's something there. So he makes the case that at the roots of reality, and this ties in a bit with what Hoffman says, but at the roots of reality, you start to describing wave functions and stuff like that in terms of numbers, in terms of numerical values. So he says at some point it's all math, and he says there are some things which are true for all time, right? Immutable, eternal for all time, regardless of the existence of physical realities and mental realities. So if you remove all physical worlds, all minds, he reckons the mathematics will remain true for all time, unalterable. And somehow from those mathematics, you get mathematical structures, you get geometry, and you get the emergence of physical worlds, physical realities, and somehow it also gives rise to consciousness. So he doesn't say that he sees consciousness as something that is, you know, the ultimate reality. He sees the substrate as mathematical, and from that you get all possible worlds, right? And they are kind of tied to one another. You know, there's the mathematical realm, there's the physical realm, there's the mental realm, and it all works in harmony. But the main one would be mathematics. I mean, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, but
Is it,
let me give you another example that you can see that. Let's suppose that there was somebody that, a programmer that programmed this universe. Okay, you can learn about the how was it done. One way of learning is to get the code and study the code. And I think what Donald Hoffman is trying to do here is trying to explain the code by saying that the code itself, the code coded itself. I mean, it used math to code itself. I mean, that's one way of seeing it. But why can you be open to, instead of assuming that the code developed by math itself, why can you assume that a consciousness wrote the code? So instead of trying to find out only by looking at the code, why don't you try to ask the programmer, you know, what was your intention when you wrote this code? What were you trying to get? And the programmer can say, yeah, I wrote this because I wanted to do this and that and that. So it's like that, trying to explain only by math, and by math by developing itself.
Yeah.
So that's the type of explanation he's trying to bring. I think he should be open to the assumption that there can be an intention behind this physical universe, and it was designed with certain intention. And to know about the intention, the best way would be to ask who developed it, who programmed it.
It could be a teleological. Yeah.
Now I want to jump into, because I want to finish with the review. I want to jump into, there was a discussion around almost the 2-hour mark about free will. I don't know if you remember that. But anyway, I can read what it was said there. It says, I will still be able to talk about this agent has free will, but all of the constituents also have their own free will. My guess is that might be able to be made to work so that the question is, if I say, is it only the one big consciousness that has free will, and the other ones are puppets, or do all the little consciousness have free will? And he says the answer might be both. And the thing is that probably Donald Hoffman doesn't see a problem with this, but I do see a problem. I mean, from my experiences, I see there is something homogeneous, that I don't feel that I have a conflict of different parts of my consciousness saying I want this and I want that, and if somebody wins, that's the result in free will. I see that there's no competition. There is only one homogeneous decision in everything. And the thing is that he starts with these conscious agents. Have you read about that? That he talks about these conscious agents, that they are related to the neurons, and for example, a conscious agent can be a group of conscious agents. So you can have like different hierarchies of conscious agents. But
Yeah,
the
hierarchies. Yeah,
problem I see with that is that if you start from bottom up, like he tries to do, what if it's like doing an assumption like the cells of my body, each of them have an opinion to what I'll do. But there can be conflicts because let's say my left leg wants to do something and my right leg wants to do something else.
yeah,
Am I going to be able to walk? You
yeah,
see, I see a problem with that bottom-up approach.
yeah. And it,
But for his model, it's essential that apparently that he needs a bottom-up approach because he's trying to build up from the conscious agents to end up with a big conscious agent that is our individual self. But I see a
yeah,
problem with that because he thinks that there can be an agreement of free will from the little entities to the big one. But I see that can arise conflicts. I mean,
I also
it's
see.
like all the time there has to be a total agreement, constant agreement all the time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's he says that there is just this one consciousness, and then objects have no causal power, and somehow everything is in agreement with all there is conscious observers, and then somehow they all have free will, and it's in agreement with the source, isn't it? With the one.
Oh, one thing they say also is that they assume that we might reintegrate with oneness when we die.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, I don't see any evidence for that. I mean, one thing you can say is that you might feel more connected because I mean in NDEs people say that I feel the connection and I feel I can hear or I can know about so many things. So it's like you are in a network.
yeah,
But that's different than losing the sense of self. That because they say here, so you will maintain a sense of awareness, but all of your sense of self is gone forever. I think that was said by Tom.
yeah,
So I don't actually agree that we'll necessarily lose the sense of self.
yeah.
I
I
mean,
do
but in the
remember.
sense that being
Yeah,
integrated with a oneness, so you kind of like lose your free will. You become part of the awareness of the oneness.
sure, sure. I do remember Hoffman saying that. Um, I think it's the last piece of text I've got there. But if you want, we don't have to go through it. But I can mention it briefly. I do
No, go ahead.
remember
Go
him.
ahead.
Yeah. Okay. He basically says that if you take the headset off. Anyway, I'm just going to read it and then we can go
Yeah,
from
yeah, go
there
ahead.
very
Go ahead.
quick. Um, so he goes, well, my guess is at death we take off the headset and maybe we lose a lot of that stuff. Maybe we lose a lot of stuff that was in the headset, but we're still aware. But we're just not tacked into the headset anymore. That's my guess. So there, I'm completely open to being wrong, deeply wrong.
Yeah, I think
But there,
that was Don Hoffman saying it. Yeah, that
yeah.
makes sense. Yeah.
And then he goes, but there are near-death experiences that may or may not point to that kind of thing that people have. So he does say that you take the headset off and that we might lose some things about ourselves, some aspects of ourselves. I mean, to me, it's redolent of the story of the woman that has a car crash, and then she forgets who she is, who the husband is. She doesn't remember loving him, and then she has to start afresh. And then she develops a liking for bananas that she didn't have before. So
Mm.
I don't know if that scenario, which actually happened in real life, if that is actually some kind of evidence that points to what Hoffman's saying, but there's definitely something that remained in that woman's experience, which is her own awareness. So in that sense, that never went away. So I wonder if at death we take the headset off, and I wonder how much we would lose. But then again, I don't know. Perhaps we don't lose anything. Perhaps we actually become more whole, um, earlier I said about my idea of that perhaps the brain doesn't really generate consciousness. It actually impairs how much we can perceive. It narrows.
Exactly, like a constraint.
So if you remove the headset, it's almost like you don't have a brain anymore. So it could actually enrich your experience and would bring it closer to the one or something like that. I don't know. What do you make of this?
No, I agree, and I also agree with what Don Hoffman was saying, that the NDEs can bring us more data to speculate about what happens. So
Yeah.
I'm going more towards his thinking than what Tom was saying. Actually, I have only one last part that I wanted to add, and that's it. I don't know if you remember, at some
Sure.
point, Tom mentions, I would like to experience how it would be if I become my wife. I mean, living the life from the perspective of his wife, and then his wife doing the opposite of, living a day like him.
Like a swap.
But the thing is that I noticed that he's influenced by materialism, because he's saying that he will become like his wife, and his wife will become like him. And actually, that also disagrees with the typical case in movies, because in movies, usually when you get into somebody else's body, you keep your consciousness, right? So, for example, a guy that becomes that is part of a girl's body, and then the girl's consciousness go into the boy's body, but
And the
they
guy's like,
keep
oh my God, I've
their
got boobs now.
consciousness, right? It's not like they change to, they keep acting like themselves even though they are in a different body.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like not what I expected.
Yeah, it's almost like he's still prone to thinking in terms of materialism, because it's like he probably imagines a case where if you trade places with that person, say your wife, atom for atom, you would obviously become like your wife. The physicalist view is that if you trade places with your wife atom for atom, you would have her memories, you would have her experience, you would feel like her, and you would probably have no notion anymore of being Claudio. So I think he's thinking in those terms still, but then at the same time, it's a contradiction in what he says, because he says that neurons don't exist, that they only begin to exist when you look inside heads.
Right.
So it's almost like similar to the Copenhagen interpretation, and if you're going to take that view, how can you possibly say that if you trade places using the atoms and stuff like that, how can you possibly fully become the other person? Surely trading places would mean your sense of who you are in a body that's completely new. So if you trade places with your wife, you would be like, wow, this is a new body, this is my wife's body. You would start thinking in those terms. It would be something completely new to you. You'd feel that novelty.
Actually, it made me think about something now. Have you seen Star Trek, for example? Star Trek Next Generation?
A long time ago, I used to watch Star Trek here and there. I think
Picard,
I watched
do you remember
Insurrection.
Picard, Captain Picard?
Yeah.
Well, one thing I want to mention that is that when they do the beamings, that like they beam up or beam down
Beat me up,
to a
Scotty.
planet. Yeah, remember?
Yeah.
They transfer the matter, right? They transfer all the atoms of the body.
Yeah.
So basically, that's kind of like a materialistic view, that because they transfer the matter, it becomes the same consciousness becomes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being up to date with the matter, keeping everything, all the memories, all the awareness, everything inside matter. There's no evidence for that. because so far science didn't discover how the memory is stored in the brain. They didn't
Yeah.
discover, because otherwise you can download all the memories of somebody from the brain,
Yeah.
but nobody was able to do it so far. I mean, some
Yeah.
people think it will be possible in the future, but it's still
Yeah.
that big question mark. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. There's still.
And that's actually evidence against materialism. But anyway, what I
Yeah.
was saying is that in Star Trek, it contradicts in the case that they got into the body of somebody else, because if that is the case, is that consciousness is not dependent on the body.
Yeah.
So they might have some contradiction.
Yeah. There's definitely a
When they,
contradiction.
like sometimes it fully depends on the body and other times it doesn't.
And it doesn't. Yeah.
Because,
You
for
know.
example, there were aliens that in some episodes in Star Trek Next Generation, they took possession of a body of a
Yeah.
human, but it
Yeah.
was the consciousness of the alien
Of the alien.
in
Yeah.
the human, right? But
Yeah.
that what happens then if it gets teleported, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's
What's
right.
going to happen? It's going to preserve the consciousness of the alien in that body. That's something that.
Yeah. How is it that the conscious gets transferred as well along with the body if the
Correct.
consciousness is not the same as the body, and if you can swap bodies but retain the same consciousness, it gets really tricky. Um, there's a book called Reasons and Persons by Derek Parfit, and there is a section in the book where he comes up with a thought experiment, and basically um, they it's in the future and someone builds like a teleporter, yeah, so you get inside the teleporter and then there's a voice that comes on and tells you, well, you're going to be teleported to Mars, right? And you know, are you ready? You press a button and it tells you uh, you're going to disappear here and then you're going to appear on Mars, right? And then you're going to be living on Mars, and that happens. Um, but then, and then this person does it, and then comes back to Earth, and then tells his wife. It's something like that, and then the wife decides to use the teleporter several times. She's dubious, but then she goes on it, and then the husband decides to use it again. But next time he does it, there's a voice that comes on saying, oh, we have a new version of the teleporter now because the old system broke down, and now when you press the button, um, your replica will be copied on Mars first, and once it's there, then we're gonna erase you. So the book says, imagine this thought experiment, and it asks you, do your intuitions change? Does your opinion change about whether you'll survive or not? If you disappear first, right, and then you appear on Mars, you tend to think, yeah, I'm going to be living on Mars. But then if your copy appears on Mars first, and then the voice says, now we're going to eliminate you, it's almost like people tend to think, oh my God, I'm going to die now. I'm going to get killed, especially when you hear a voice from the replica, you know, on the intercom saying, oh, I'm here, you know, everything's fine. And they start speaking with the copy on Earth. So your intuition changes. What's going on there? And yeah, the book kind of has a whole chapter exploring.
That's another thing that is possible to do to falsify what happens. For example, when they do the teleporting in Star Trek,
Yeah,
they store first they store the physical data of the human, or it can work with aliens too, with the person and they store it somewhere, right? And then they send that information, and then it gets integrated in the new place.
yeah.
So but what I want to say is that when they store the information, what if they, instead of sending the information once, they send it twice. So basically it can duplicate. Let's suppose I go to the teleporter, but
Yeah.
at the end, somebody decides to bring up two Claudios instead of one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is the other one gonna be exactly like me? I mean, that experiment can be done here. Let's say you create a duplicate of a body that is exactly the same thing as the original
Yeah.
body. So then you might, I don't know, speculate about how dependent everything is on the body or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Because it's a difficult one, because it would be like clones, and each clone would think they're the original, and say there's two Claudios.
Yeah, but not only
And
clones, but exactly the same state,
exactly.
physical state of the clone at that time. Because I mean,
Yeah.
you can create clones, and when you separate the clones, since they have different experiences, different foods that they eat, they're gonna start changing. Once
They're
you
going to start
separate the
changing.
clones,
Yeah.
because they're gonna eat differently, they're gonna experience different things. So
Yeah.
once you separate the clones,
They
they're
become
not gonna
different
be
people.
exactly the same after a while.
Yeah.
But in
So
this case, at this instant, they are exactly the same, right?
yeah. So at the moment of separation, they still have the same memories. And people say, in some sense, memory interrelates with consciousness. So they've got the same memories, and they feel like they're the same person. But as they separate and they have new experiences, they begin to differ, and
Right.
they can even become different people. And then they can even have arguments based on the different things that they've been exposed to. But then on some level, they would also have the same love for the same wife. It's really, in some sense, they're the same, but they're not. I really don't know what the solution to that problem is, other than to think that perhaps on some level we are
Because
all, it sounds crazy, but we're all one consciousness, and we can experience from different perspectives, and also those perspectives could be identical, but then in space and time they could diverge, as in the case of the two Claudios. And then they would be similar, but they would be different. But the
yeah,
perspectives would be similar. I don't know, but then
no,
again,
yeah, I agree with what you're saying. But another thing I'm thinking, let's suppose that it works. So that would be a way to create a new consciousness from the physical. Because another possibility would be that there is only one soul of me. So my soul is gonna be forced to choose between the two bodies. So it's gonna be able to only handle one of them.
yeah,
And then what can happen with the other body might be that it might either die, or some consciousness from the non-physical might jump into the body because it has the opportunity to use that body that has no no driver. Let's say it's like a vehicle without a driver.
yeah,
So it's like we need a new driver here, so they might bring a new soul, a new consciousness.
yeah,
So in that case, the Claudios are going to behave very differently
yeah. And in
because it's going to
fact,
depend mainly on the consciousness that in the body.
yeah, I was going to say, you can have uh, contrasting behaviors in the same body. If someone was to split your corpus callosum, as in split brain patients, if someone did that to you now, you'd probably have one side of your body contradicting the other side of the body. So you're
Oh
you're
yeah,
trying to grab an object, and yet the other hand is going like that, and you're at loggerheads with the other side of your head. And they say, oh, perhaps for most people, perhaps you would be more like the left hemisphere, because it deals with language and mathematics and tries to piece the world, and the other one is more holistic, but it can become its own independent mind. And they have said that.
well, the memories are going to be different too, but at the same time, I
Yeah.
think it might be some unification that despite having two, it's kind of like having a computer with two separate memories,
Yeah.
but it might still behave like the same computer. So I don't know. I mean, I think that's an interesting topic to do more research.
Definitely. I mean, they say people who have done these experiments with split-brained patients, they say that there's the dominant side, and then the other side, which deals in art, music, holistic things, it tends to exhibit more consciousness than an infant. It's actually quite intelligent. So and then they say, in some sense, it's literally like you've created two minds in the same body. But obviously, the question is, what happens to Claudia, the Claudia that's that I'm interacting with right now? If someone were to split your brain in two, would you be which side would you be? Because
I
they
don't know, but it
communicate
might happen
different things.
that one of the Claudios will remember part of it and the other one. But the thing is that if you record the video, let's say I remember, I mean, the left Claudio remembers part of it and the second Claudio the other part of it. When both watch the whole video, they can realize the whole thing.
Yeah.
So I guess it can be solved by doing some post-processing, let's say.
Sure. I was only going to say, have you heard of the Ramachandran experiments where he tests this one split-brained patient and he asks one side, do you believe in God? And I think the left side says no. And then he asks the right side, and the right side says yes. And then he asks the question, well, if there's a heaven and hell, yeah, I think it's a joke, basically. He says, if there's a heaven and hell, what, does one side go up and the other side go down? I don't
Yeah,
know.
that's interesting. That's an interesting.
That is interesting.
I'm gonna get into that later. You can pass me the info. And anyway,
Yeah.
thank you, Arlindo, for
Thanks a
being
lot for
here
having
with
me.
me, and we're gonna meet again.
Yeah, no, definitely. We should do this again. Yeah, no problem. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's been really interesting.
Yeah, you're welcome. Have a good one. Let's keep in touch.
You too.
We
Yeah.
can do the practices like we
Yeah.
talked.
Next time with Michael, if he
Yeah.
decides
Okay.
to come again.
So have a good one.
You too.
Take
Take
care.
care, Claudio. No
Bye.
problem. Cheers. Bye.